they had a really strong idea of the visual identity and art direction of the game, because they wanted to make dark fantasy, but inspired by Spain and by really Christian themes, and this made it like really clear in the sense what you could do or what you should pick and what is maybe not the best choice.
Hello, viewers, and welcome to One Story Building, where I'm here talking to people about stories, as is always the case. Today's guest is pixel art consultant, pixel artist, and someone with a surname that I had to check how to say before we even started this. It is Thomas Feichtmeir. Is that it? Feichtmeir?
Feichtmeir, yeah, you did well.
Got it wrong. I checked how to say it, and I still got it wrong. Moving swiftly along. So, as a visual artist, as a pixel artist, could you please tell us how you got into the world of visual art?
Yeah, that's really interesting actually, because as I was young, I generally wanted to do something with art, and then I come from Western Austria, and there is not much of a art art community or art surrounding around. Like, we have some schools which are focusing on art, but basically it's really hard there to get the job. And so, like, at some point I decided that I will go to one of those art schools, but at the time I did not really enjoy it, and I was like really worried that at some point I would get a job. And so I stopped the art school and I took up an engineering school, actually, like for machine building. And I studied building engineering. So like that's like heating systems, climate systems, that kind of stuff. And in order like to do that and to have a better chance of a job, I actually left the art school after like 1.5 years, I think. And actually, it was really funny, because in the engineering school, I would start like working with RPG Maker with a friend on some like little spare time project. Of course, it was like our first project, way too big scoped, like everybody who makes their first game. And at some point, that project failed, and I put in like art I created for that on DeviantArt and on some other platforms in the internet. And then actually, this is how I got my first job, because there was like a person who was developing browser games at the time. And they asked me if I would be interested in drawing graphics for them. And this was paid. And so basically the last 2.5 years during engineer school, I already had like my first experiences with freelancing art. So it kind of came organically. So then I finished like my engineering school, and after that I had like the chance to basically to get a job at my employer, where I did like my final project for schoolwork, or I could get self-employed with a bigger risk, and I could like basically do art, like the same pixel art which I did back then. And I was like, yeah, okay, I think I will risk it. But like right now I got nothing to lose. So I will just go like and get self-employed. And yeah, I mean, luckily it worked out.
Yeah, I love that. I love those stories where someone takes a risk at following some kind of passion, and then it actually pays off in like a genuine big way. Was there anything that you learned in engineering school that in some way transitioned to your skills as an artist?
Oh, there's so much. Oh my God.
Oh, really?
Like,
okay, good.
I mean, so first of all, like, there's just so, like, I mean, video game development has a lot to do with mathematics. And of course, as engineer, you learn a lot of higher mathematics. And I mean, I'm not a great mathematician, like I'm a very visual person. So, but like a lot of the mathematical principles and a lot of those things we learned helps me on my day-to-day basis, like especially with game dev. I learned coding as well, like with C#. There mathematics helps a lot. Then we had higher physics. That means like we had liquid dynamics, we had like optics. We have a lot of formulas for that. So all that kind of stuff helps incredible a lot with painting, because you just learn about like the physical models and you kind of know how it works, and that helps so much with painting. For example, if you know how refraction works, how reflection works, how that kind of stuff works, that helps a lot. Then, of course, the more obvious things is we had also mechanics. So all the way how you draw machines, how you draw like bridges, how you draw architecture. Like you have a really, really good. I chose building engineering, so we also had like building technology and building materials and that kind of stuff. And that helps me so much with like, if I look at architecture, or later as I was reading a lot of art history and architecture books, like it's just, if you know also the engineering background, like you can do a ton with it. Like, and there are so many things like where I'm just happy that I have that engineering education, because like from a pure art education, I would never look that stuff up actually, and I'm so grateful like that I chose it that way.
Yeah, that just makes all the sense in the world. When I asked you, did your engineering degree help you with art, I was expecting you to just instantly and comically just say nope. But yeah, that makes sense. When you're trying to figure out the architectural foundations of a building, that gives you a bit more of an insight into how to draw a building, because it's more than just drawing what you see. You can draw how it would actually exist on a 2D level, because when you look at it, you're looking at it from like a flat perspective. Oh, mind blown. But pixel art, how did you transition into doing specifically pixel art above all other forms of art?
Yeah, no, that's really interesting as well, because I mean, at first, like as I was a kid, I was drawing a lot of comics. I was drawing like mostly a lot of ink drawings. I also was like doing some typography once at a little shop, like where they made like those documents for people. Like you could go there and could get like a document for like first prize for some contest or something, like, and they made it like for musicians and for for the hunting guild we had, like and kind of stuff like that. So that's the kind of stuff I did. I started like doing that RPG Maker, and RPG Maker actually used pixel art. And also as a kid, I was like, I was playing a lot of Game Boy Advance games, and also I had later on I bought a Super Nintendo. So because I did not have one, but as I was 16, like I bought one from a friend, and that's where I saw like that pixel art thing. And at the beginning, I thought, oh, it's for sure not so hard, like to draw like a picture with a couple of little cubes. It does not seem to be difficult because it's so small. And actually, it turned out it's a great, it's a very different kind of drawing, because suddenly the most important element of drawing, which is the line, is completely like it does not exist anymore. So that means now you've got pixels and you've got like clumps of colors, and you've got something which is like resembling a line, at least if it's horizontal and vertical, but not if it's diagonal, because it's like has like the staircase effect. And that's where kind of got interesting in the big field, like where I just wanted to know more. And I think a lot of it just has to do to find out about the specific nature of art, or generally what you can do with one style or one medium, what you can't do with another medium. And so I tried like also in art school we painted like with watercolors, we painted with oil paint, we painted with tempera, of course charcoal. And it's, if you take all those different types of mediums and then you look at pixels and you also look at digital art, then I think there is like, I would say it's its own medium or its very own way to paint in a sense. And that's I think that I had the first really deep experiences with a painting medium where I kind of realized things about art with pixel art, and that's why I still like it so much.
I love the way that you describe it, how when you're doing pixel art, the line, the very foundation of drawing in general is now gone because it's just squares put together. And when you paint, the colors mesh together. When you draw, the drawing bits can mesh together. But with pixel art, even if you work on shading and try and make the hues and the saturation of each cell kind of similar to the ones next to it, they're not meshing together. It's just the look of it from a distance. And that's what's so interesting about pixel art above all other kinds of art. But I get the impression that a lot of people view pixel art in a very shallow way, because when they think of pixel art, they think of old games that have now been upgraded with 3D art. What do you say to those people that view pixel art as being a regressive form of art?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting one, because I think it comes from two parts, actually. So on the one hand, we have pixel art, of course, in old video games, and pixel art in itself, it's like very iconic for video games. So because if I ask you to think of video games, most likely there's at least one picture in your head with pixel art thing.
Super Mario,
for example. Yeah, most people think of Super Mario. So like there is that really strong connection in the mind to that, especially in our current generation. And then there is another thing, and I would call that marketing. So we know that there are a lot of indie pixel art video games which are coming out. And so what marketers did for the last 10, 15 years is like they took like that retro pixel art game and they were marketing it like with a lingo, which is like, oh, it's retro, it's pixel art. Even though the game might not even be, like the game could have very modern gameplay and it could have like really innovative gameplay. But marketing lingo is just, oh, it's retro, because that's easy. It's also, what I always say with that is, okay, why do you think that 3D art is better? It's also because of marketing, because we had like 20 years where people in the marketing department, they tried to say, oh, it's like cutting edge technology. We have all those 3D things, all like it's marketing.
So what programs do you use to make your own pixel art?
Actually, I use a very, very old program, and it's GIMP 2.6.12, and it's like very specific. I use it because it's like at the edge where the screen resolution was small enough, and like it's kind of like a really pixely Photoshop. So a lot of the things in the program, they are like Photoshop, but more pixely. This would be really bad for digital painting, but it's really nice actually for pixel art. And then the other thing the program has, it's like an open license program, and you can actually look up all the code, all the tiny little functions the program has. They are open, and you can modify the program as well, like with specific add-ons. So that means on the one hand, you know exactly how everything in that program is working, which is very important if you do color optimization, if you want to use like all those things, because you just have the full control of that program. The other point is the very basic tools in that program, and I am talking mainly about the pen and the color picker. It's like the best there is, and I tried a lot of software. It's just the convenience, because GIMP has like two types of color picker. One is with 6 sliders, where you have the RGB space and the HSV space in a single picture, basically, and you see all 6 values at once. And you have like the classical color picker with the circle and the triangle in between, where you can perfectly go through the HSV space. And that alone for pixel art and for color operations, it's like really powerful. And it's just super fast at the things I needed 80% of the day for. Maybe it does not have some of the fancy features new software has. But like for how I use it and how quick I want to get to the end, it's just perfect. But it's like, if you just sit down and you try to operate it, it's horrible. Like I would never recommend the program to a beginner. And if there's a beginner, I always say use Sprite, because basically that's a really nice program to just start out and to just hobby-wise do that.
Can you tell us the name of that program one more time?
So it's GIMP 2.6.12.
Goodness, so technical, so fancy. I'm already intimidated.
Yeah.
So you have been doing pixel art for video games for well over a decade now. Can you tell us the process of how you jump on board onto these games, and what steps are taken from start to finish of you doing pixel art for their projects?
So yeah, generally, I mean, usually it starts out that either I get in contact with somebody or somebody gets in contact with me. Those are mostly like either people you know, like from the internet, or people you know from conventions and you talked at some point, or you heard something somewhere. Like, so generally, already there's like some kind of understanding. If there is not, there is some talking going on. What the project is about. And depending on the project, the field of work can differ a lot. So that means like for some projects, I was background artist. For some projects, I was animator. For some projects, I was consultant. For other projects, I was art director. So, I mean, of course, if you start out, you rather work as artist. And then if you get into bigger projects, you also get more specialized jobs. So that means like in the small indie project, you rather will be wearing many hats. And in a more professional production where there is a team, there will be more specialized jobs or other people or bigger teams. But yeah, generally somebody is reaching out to me. They have a very specific job they need to have done. They ask me if I can do it. Then you agree like kind of on a schedule, and then you just sit down and do the work.
Did you say that you sometimes get work through conventions? What an
Yes.
unconventional way of going about. How do you get into contact with people for jobs at a convention?
So generally, I mean, I gave a lot of talks on conventions. I mean, I talk about pixel art, and it's usually like the question is, what does somebody need? I mean, most of my consulting jobs actually somebody sees me on a convention talk about pixel art, that they need some specialist, like some person who on the one hand knows a lot about it and also has a lot of experience like in the production with it. Because just if you're good at drawing, it does not really mean that you have like the experience with working on games. So as I said, I did like, as you said already, I'm doing it for well over a decade. I think now it's like 12 or 13 years. And I worked in that time on over 25 released games where I was like the artist, and I worked on like 60 or 70 where I did just consulting. So where basically somebody booked me and I gave some information away. So generally, yeah, just people need somebody who can help them with the problem. And usually it's way cheaper, way more efficient, and way more convenient if you just have somebody who had that problem in the past. They ran into all the issues themselves and they can tell it to you.
Can you tell us about how you have witnessed the different changes and adaptations and progresses and processes of pixel art indie games all the way back from the 2010s up to now? How have they changed over the years?
Oh yeah, they changed a lot. I mean, as I was starting out, like there weren't many indie game projects with a budget actually. So in the 2010s, I mean, we had like the first wave of indie games, but if you had like a project which had like a budget of, I don't know, back then up to, let's say, 10,000 euro, that would be amazing because it was mostly like people working in their hobby time on their project, and there haven't really been like the concept of indie publishers was not really around. And so it was really hard to get like money. And then at some point Kickstarter came around, which gave like indie games a really, really big boost. And then with all the successes of Kickstarter, publishers who started to specializing into indie games came around. Some of the really big publishers now, like Raw Fury or Devolver, they really started to pick up steam like in the 2013s, 2014s, 2015s with that wave. And then really some really big pixel art projects happened like Hyperlight Drifter got like, I think at some point $600,000 on Kickstarter, and it was a huge success. And suddenly people started to realize that pixel art is not like that relic of the past, like which is gone, but there are people who play the game even though the graphic, like the charming way how they look, or that it's just what is displayed on the screen, even if it's like let's say less sophisticated than a 3D game and not realistic, that people like that style. Like people love that. And for specific games, that style even can be stronger than 3D. And that's where then publishers started to pour money into those things. And now we have a couple of projects which have well over $1 million of budget. Like, I mean, I don't know any specifics, but I mean, if we just look at the big projects which came out and are coming out, like, I mean, Blasphemous is one which was really big and really, had like really high-end pixel art graphics. Sea of Stars, which is coming out, is also like really highly polished. So like their Songs of Conquest I worked on also is like a really big production. So now it's like kind of more established in a sense, and people know that it's a viable art style. And this was, as we went from pixel art to 3D, like there was like that gap where it was not seen as its own thing, as its own unique style.
Blasphemous is a perfect example of what I would just call right now serious looking pixel art, and you've worked on it. You've done beautiful pieces of like old granular, which pixel art excels at, because it's all cells, this granular sort of dusty ancient castle kind of look for it. When you are a pixel art consultant, how do you consult people on pixel art on a game as an expert?
Okay, so maybe let's quickly go to Blasphemous, because that's really interesting. Because what I did there is I did a lot of the Gothic architecture. So and I did a lot of the big set pieces where there were like Gothic churches or just altars and those kind of things. And it's funny because at the beginning I was talking like how my engineering helped me with drawing those buildings. And because like I have interest in like in architecture as well. So I looked in a lot of those old classical architecture books from like where the different styles are described. And I studied that for some time. And it was really cool with Blasphemous because, there are a lot of the things I knew from books and I studied, and I wanted to use the principles I could use like for Gothic architecture.
Forgive my ignorance. Is it blasphemous or blasphemous?
Oh, that's a really good question. I heard both pronunciations. I don't know. I mean, I'm not a native English speaker, so...
blasphemous sounds cooler, so let's go with blasphemous. Blasphemous. When you are pulled on board to a gaming project, what exactly do they give you before you even start anything?
Yeah, in this case, it was like... they basically, like in this case, they wanted to have basically some dark fantasy, which was Spanish inspired. So what I did is like I looked at a lot of the Spanish architecture, Seville, Madrid, those kind of things, and I kind of tried to get like a feeling for what they have there. And of course, I know a couple of the buildings there, so I basically just designed something for them which would have suited their idea. they had a really strong idea of the visual identity and art direction of the game, because they wanted to make dark fantasy, but inspired by Spain and by really Christian themes, and this made it like really clear in the sense what you could do or what you should pick and what is maybe not the best choice. And if somebody has like a really strong visual idea for the game, it always like it's transcending, like the art direction idea you have, it basically transcends the whole thing.
Yeah, and the way that the playable character in Blasphemous moves around, it's so fast and flowy. It isn't really what you would think of when you think of a pixel art character, because somebody might think of a stiff Super Mario who's jumping in a very stiff and jagged way. But our pointy-headed Blasphemous friend, he's doing flips and throwing his sword around. How exactly, using pixel art, do you effectively show movement without it looking too stiff and jagged?
Yeah, I mean, maybe a lot of people think of Super Mario, but also there's like the genre of the cinematic platform, where you have games like the first Prince of Persia and Another World. And there are a couple of other games in that genre also in development. Basically, it's rotoscopy. Rotoscopy is that you are taking some footage with a camera of somebody, and then you are overpainting that footage. So, and that also was like pioneered with pixel art games, especially like the person who made Prince of Persia pioneered that, and it was like super cool because it was the first really fluid animation. And then if you think about motion capturing, it's very similar. It's just more tech involved, because you put the nodes on a human, and then you get like the raw data, and you don't overpaint it like visually, but you get like the data model, and that data model still needs cleanup, but it's like a reference. So it's just again, older technology, and you see like a different application in 2D and a different application in 3D, because 3D has like the depth information.
You mentioned Another World. Another World is a perfect example of what can be done with very little resources. For those who don't know, Another World is a 2D-ish side-scrolling pixel art game from way back in the day. Eric Chahi, I think is his name. He's a fantastic visual artist, does a lot of pixel art stuff. There's no music, I don't think, not really any talking, but it tells this not necessarily deep story, but this enthralling story of someone being lost on this alien planet. And pixel art sums it up so perfectly, because pixel art, it's a very limited form of art, but you can do so much with it using people's imagination. Just 5 pixels put together, you can do like a bunny or a squirrel. Undertale is a bit like that as well, where the art in some places looks kind of janky and off, and not in some sort of like cute South Park kind of way. It just looks kind of weird. But with with it being pixel art, it has this sort of fun sort of charm to it. I mean, have you found that how pixel art with its limited ability can somehow do so much?
Yes, I think that's like the biggest feature of pixel art, because if you have a picture which has like a lot of details, that it's a highly realistic rendered thing, you get something I would call which is a visual imperative. So that means the picture exactly tells you down to the smallest detail how it should look. So there is no way for you to interpret anything, because the picture basically tells you, and this detail looks like that, and this detail looks like that, and this detail looks like that. But now if we think of like the jumping Mario, and we ask ourselves, okay, what's the exact facial expression of Mario? Does Mario have hair on the arms, or does he not have hair on the arms? What's the texture of his pants? What's the texture of his pullover? Like, there's a lot of stuff we can come up with like in our head, and we interpret from ourselves in the picture. So it means like the little sprite looks way more detailed to us than it actually is, and we can come up with our own storytelling in it. So we we put ourselves in the sprite. It leaves enough room for interpretation. So, and I think it's very similar if you read a book and you only have like words, and some people who read books, they start seeing a movie in their head. So for me, it always was like that. But now I know not everybody has that. And I think with pixel art, it's kind of similar. Like the more you know, or the more fantasy you might have, the more detailed the suggestion you give to the viewer through a pixel art picture, like the more detailed it is. And so I think it's for a lot of people really enjoyable to kind of get the suggestion and then use their own creativity to come up with their own interpretation of what is exactly there. And there are also a lot of really nice examples where like a pixel art sprite looks like one thing, but you can interpret it in many different ways. So like the chin and the neck could be also interpreted as the mouth and the jawline or something like this. I actually could give you a couple of those examples because I love collecting them. And it's just like that, how much personality you just can inject on your own in that pixel art piece if it's at a small enough resolution. And that is like a lot of the magic.
Beautiful. So when you were a pixel art consultant on our favorite game right now, Blasphemous, when they were asking you about how they could draw a gigantic archaic bell in Blasphemous, what steps are taken through the whole process of the game's visual development? How do you intercede and help them out with their pixel art?
Yeah, so generally Blasphemous is maybe not the really best example because there I did not really influence the art direction that much. So there it was more like, okay, we need to have this specific thing and you draw it and you are the artist. So I just came in as the art specialist for architecture in that case, and I did some architecture stuff. But there has been another game I did consulting for, and it's named Dome Creeper, and it was one of the most outstanding successes of indie games last year. So, and actually what's really interesting about this story-wise is that it's a small German developer team. It's just like René and his wife, and they were working on it together. And they made games before. Then they always took part in Ludum Dare. So this is a game jam. That means like you have 3 days and you can make a game. And at the time they made the game, which back then was named Dome Romantic, and it was already really close to what Dome Creeper would become. So, and then they decided to turn like their Ludum Dare project, because it was like, I think it got the 3rd place in the convention. They decided to turn it into a full game. And really early on, they were actually reaching out to me on consulting. And that was really interesting because they had a publisher at the time and they had a time frame. So they had 6 months to basically develop the game, and the publishing deal was more or less standing. And now they never they made smaller games, but they never made something of the magnitude they just wanted to do, and not in like a fixed time frame. So how I came in is mainly they asked me, they commissioned a couple of different mock-ups from various artists. And they basically had also their game jam game, and the question was, so okay, how can we make the game jam entry visually a lot more appealing while also hitting the goal for the time? So because there's a development time, and of course, the more time you have, the more detail, the more content you can produce. So there were, of course, content goals. So now I help them basically with finding or keeping the aspects of the art direction they already had, that their final product would be what people kind of understood as the game jam game, which already did do really well. And on the other hand, a lot of decisions were made like on how to efficiently make environments, how to efficiently make character models that they can be animated, that like the content goals can be hit. And in this case, it was really great because the game did really well at the end. And I'm a big fan of games which have a lot of content. And I think it's way more important for a game to have a lot of content than that it looks just beautiful. Because if you have experience which is just 10 minutes long and it looks amazing, then it would need to be a really outstanding, really unique experience to kind of matter. But if you have a game which you can play longer, it's more like in line by people buy a game to play because they want to play something in their spare time. And yeah, so in this case, I did consulting on the direction, on how the game like can be improved in specific parts while not moving too far away from what people already loved about the demo. And also then there were like some specific things like UI where I gave a lot of input or how the background layers could move around and more technical stuff. But yeah, the outcome, what was really great about this project was it exactly hit the time goal and it did extremely well. Like it's like one of the biggest indie hits of 2022. So it was excellent.
Do you have any specific examples of you showing up to a game project, them showing you pixel art pieces that they've done, and you giving them advice as to how to adjust it to make it more appropriate?
Yes, exactly. There's another really, how should I say? Like there's a game from Poland. Its name is Sacrifier. And it's like kind of like Octopath, and they had a Kickstarter. So like you can imagine it a bit looking like Octopath Traveler, like it has those really impressive 3D worlds with sprites and the lighting. And so actually what they did is they asked me to overlook a couple of their scenes and their sprites and their coloring, how to make it more readable, or where they could do specific stuff with textures, how they could like slightly alter maybe perspective of specific things, like within the limitation, of course, of the game design. Because if you have like a 3D 2D hybrid, it gets like quickly really difficult because suddenly you don't have just the pictures on the screen, but you also have the depth. And then if you want to have still a pixel art look with the depth, you need to handle the pictures in a very specific way that it still looks good and it like the quality is like transcending.
As a pixel art consultant, have you ever seen any common errors that pixel artists make when they're putting a game together?
Oh yeah, that's actually the main reason why I get called in. So because you need to imagine, most people who start out in the game, they start making a kind of pixel art game or 2D game. And of a lot of the people who make a pixel art game and they don't have really a lot of experience with game dev, they need to do many things. So usually they learn how to draw art, they learn how to use the engine, they learn how to program. They also learn about how to use social media, and they learn basically everything as they go. So, and like everybody of us who learns something knows that at the beginning we all make common mistakes, and so it's not a surprise like that there are like the same mistakes we all make if we pick up an engine, same mistakes we do if we pick up programming, the same mistakes we do if we pick up pixel art. So this is in itself, this is not really a big problem that the mistakes are there to be made and that we learn it. But so now there are like a couple of indie publishers, and so a couple of those people who start their game, they actually get picked up by a publisher. And suddenly there's a deadline. So that means suddenly the game needs to be finished because there's a contract. So, and if you never really finish the game, but you have a contract which is telling you when to finish the game, then you might not have that much time to make that many mistakes. Or maybe you just want to get quicker to the point where you want to have a second opinion of somebody who has made a lot of those mistakes in the past. And yeah, I mean, for pixel art, it starts with things as simple as, what's the resolution I choose? How does like the style of animation impact my project? Like, what is costing a lot, what is costing little? What might be the right art style for my project to get like a good balance between how it looks and how much content I can produce? Then maybe like how detailed can I be, or also how do I handle a team of artists? So now it's not only me, but I need to have a bigger workforce because I need to be quicker. So where do I put each artist, or how do I even like, what do I need if I commission an artist? All those infos. And generally, there's a lot of information about this around in the internet. But I think it's always really, really useful if you actually have somebody you can ask. And that person is not only telling you what you ask, but the person also is telling you the things which are really important. And that's generally how it starts, is with consulting, that people have like one question, and then that question kind of starts snowballing into a lot of other areas. And then when you wanted to have like 1 hour or 2 hours, sometimes it can be like 5 hours just talking, like what you should do, what would be good, what is like for this specific unique project, or what is better, like what is the better way? Maybe not the best way, but like which ways could be more successful than other ways, because there is not always like the one right way to do things, but there are like many different ways, and every path you can take has like advantages with how good does it look, how performant is it, how much does it cost, how quickly can it be made, and all of that. And like, games are just machines with so many moving parts that it's kind of really intimidating at first if you don't have a lot of experience to kind of know what effect a decision you need to make now will have over the whole rest of the project. And spoiler, even though I have been part of like 25 projects in depth, there's still new stuff I'm learning, like, and things I did not really see coming. So
yeah, the games that you've worked on, like Tower 57, Blasphemous, our old friend, and Gestalt Steam and Cinder, these games take years from start to finish to finally get done. So as a pixel artist, what is your contribution step by step over the years as these games are slowly being put together? If you're even with them for the whole process.
Yeah. So generally, I mean, on some projects I'm a freelancer, and on other projects, like, I'm more like the art director, I'm doing significantly more. So that means, like, because making everything in every project on your own, it's not happening in games, because games are always made by teams, and there are a lot of specialists usually. I mean, even in, like, there are single dev indie game developers, but usually, even like most indie games, they have like a programmer and an artist, which is the minimum. I generally think the best idea is if you have a programmer, an artist, and actually a game designer, like somebody who's just designing the game. Because if you just have a programmer and an artist, design might be like something which falls under the rug. And good games all share one thing: they have really, really excellent design. That's why you play them. But yeah, when like, let's say I have a game where I am from the beginning, and just so, like, you start generally, what is the idea of the game? What is the art direction? What do you do in the game? Like, what will be kind of the setting? What target audience it should speak to? So this can be as simple with I make a game which kind of looks like Castlevania or looks like Zelda or looks like something else, or it can be as difficult as that you need to come up like with a lot of the things which just fit that project on its own, like with Dome Creeper. There was not a game which was like Dome Creeper before, so the whole style and feeling for that had to be like developed from thin air because it was not inspired or not strongly inspired by one single other IP. So you start with that, and then you kind of like try to find out, okay, how does the world work in a visual sense? Like, what are the areas? What's the history? Then you start making like the first concepts. Then you start like maybe making mood boards with colors. So you kind of build together like how is the person roughly running through the game. So the start area may be really, really colorful and really nice, while if it's a darker game, then the further you progress into the game, the more dangerous it looks and the more drab and dangerous the color palettes get, or depending on the area, like something like this. Then, of course, there's a lot of design stuff. There's a reason why there are environment concept artists, there are creature concept artists, there are character concept artists. Generally, every field a game needs, you can go in incredible depth, and there are really, really talented people who really specialize like on really small things. Like I know a person who is like specialized just in guns, and they are making like all the reloading for the guns, like how the ammo is ejected and that kind of stuff. And they work only in AAA studios, so it's like that level. If you are more like working in indie games, you have more like a broader vision and a broader spectrum. But generally, every game needs everything, and like you need to decide with the budget and resources you have, how deep can you go to get to the best level of quality. And that's basically the whole direction thing. And then in the execute, like at some point, you have all those questions answered, and then you basically know what you produce, and then the whole thing goes from the pre-production, where you just found out all those things, into production. And in the production is basically where you just sit down and you create the stuff. So you're sitting down and you are drawing, like you're making asset after asset after asset, and you kind of build up the game, and you add the animations and you add that stuff. And then what's also interesting is in most projects, the art is usually quite a bit finished before the overall project is finished. So that means you build the whole world, you build like all the assets for the menus, you build all the assets for the characters, and the game is still not done because there is maybe a lot of coding left, or a lot of systems left, and a lot of testing and balancing left, where the artists are already out of the project most of the times. So that means like usually an artist comes in when the game idea, kind of the rough game idea exists, and maybe a prototype exists. That's like the best time when you bring on the artist. And then artists usually leave a project when the game goes like to testing, or when there's only very little left. Like, I mean, maybe the artists don't leave completely, but the workload is just like kind of getting less and less at the end of development if the project was handled well. I mean, of course, there are projects where the planning is kind of poor and where you work until the very end and then it gets just kicked out of the door, but that is a non-ideal situation.
So all those video game assets, the characters, guns, buildings, landscapes, items, equipable items, clothing, do you have a favorite asset to create for video games? Something that you just can't wait to start putting together?
Generally, I really like worlds. So that means like I would describe myself mostly as a world builder. So that means I like to think about stuff like architecture, what kinds of, like, what's the technology level, what kind of clothing do people have, what kind of culture do people have, like a more top-down view on it. And generally, it's sometimes really interesting to go into detail. And there are some things where I can go really into detail. Like I know, like usually for video games is I know a lot about armor and I know a lot about architecture. So those are the two things I know a lot about, and I can go into real detail. But there are many other things. For example, I am not really expert on like something like dogs, for example. Like I can draw a dog, but I don't know like the really fine differences between like the types of dogs there are. There are artists which are specialized into that. So, but I have like I also have a bit of a background in history just because I am interested in, and then like if I have background in those things, you're better like at the top down. And it's so like art is so cool because there are so many fields and so many people who are specialized. And what I always think is like the magic in any game is happening when you have two or more people which are really, really good at something and they work together. And yeah, so I like to design like kind of the world and then work together with people who are really good at making cars, who are really good at making creature designs, who are really good at that specific thing which needs to be created. And it's just a pleasure then when you have the right person in the right spot in the art team and they are motivated to do it, and like they just everybody feels like they can contribute in the best way to a given project. That's when the project is really getting great, I think, always.
I must know, when you are creating pixel art, do you use a mouse or do you have a pad and a stylus?
I have both. So I use both. So I have Wacom Intuos 4, like it's just like it's like just a tablet without the screen. So really nice. Have it always lying here. Generally, this I use a lot for sketching or for getting like the early stuff down, and because you are just way more fluid if you paint like with the hand, because like making nice curves with the mouse is kind of difficult. But then there are specific tasks. For example, when you make pixel exact selections, where the mouse just is way quicker. Because you point like with the mouse is really good to point at the specific point at the screen to like make a selection. And then if you make a really exact selection, I always use the mouse. So generally, it's good to use both and not be limited to one tool. Like we're using the right tool for the right tasks and just switching like freely between them for whatever you need. It's like nice if you can do that.
So I, right now, I'm going to ask you the pixel art question. It is the question about pixel art that I'm calling the pixel art question. It's something that I've come up against when I've come across when I see people talking about large scale pixel art projects. So the question is this: could someone create a piece of pixel art that is so enormous, so vast and wide and detailed that in a way it stops being pixel art because it's just so big?
Okay, size does not say anything if it's pixel art or not, because what pixel art really is like the thinking about how you basically dissolve specific details in a piece in pixels, and you can do that well or you can do that poorly, and you can do that well in really small pieces and you can do that poorly in really small pieces, and you can do that really well in really big pieces and you can do that really poorly in really big pieces. So that is not like this is not the question here. So what's way more interesting is if you have a small piece pixel art with a small resolution, like 1 pixel is taking up maybe 10 by 10 centimeters. Like if you think like you make a character which is 18 pixels tall, and you think a human on average is like 1.80 meters tall, so 1 pixel would cover 10 by 10 centimeters of that human. And so you need to stylize, because you just like the pixel is too crude to kind of show that detail really well. Now you have a really, really big piece, and then a pixel might be as big as a centimeter or a millimeter. But now a lot of the very specific things you do in pixel art, like handling the way how the blobs of pixel colors connect, handling like just choosing the colors, making sure that a lot of the things are detailed, making just making everything read really nicely, contrast really nicely. You do that in a small piece, and you do that in a big piece in a kind of similar way, because what you are doing is to give shapes and colors a specific treatment. So yes, you can have really, really high resolution, really, really well made pixel art pieces. The only thing you lose out on is the interpretation level. So that means the bigger a piece is, the more you take away from that interpretational aspect. So where you can put a lot more of yourself in a low resolution piece, you can put a lot less in a piece with more visual imperative, as we were talking before. And that's the difference here. So it's not like as simple as, okay, I make the resolution big and I don't have pixel art anymore. It's just if you have a big piece, you have, if it's way more detailed, way more visual imperative, and you lose out on the interpretation of the viewer.
There you go. Settled, definitive now. That's all wrapped up. I actually nowadays recommend people get into some kind of visual art. It doesn't really matter what kind of visual art it is, just some kind of drawing thing, whatever it is, because when I started to dabble in it a couple of years ago, I started to see the world in a more functionally beautiful way. I'm sure that you came up against this when you were doing both your architectural engineering stuff and your art stuff, how you can see the beauty in a visual thing and the beauty in the pragmatism of something. And that is why I recommend that people get into visual art. You see the world in a more beautiful way. You start to notice shadows, how trees move around. But that's me. That's why I say people should get into visual art. Do you think people should get into some kind of visual art, even just like in a small hobby kind of way? And if so, why should they?
I think people should be really passionate about something. What that is doesn't matter. It can be art, it can be mathematics, it can be music, it can be anything. But the truth is that as soon as you get really into something, you start like to realize specific patterns, and then when it gets really like, the more you learn like those patterns, and you maybe learn them the first time. But then you get into a completely different field. I mean, can be storytelling, for example, and there's an overlap between visual arts and storytelling, because there are like specific things which overlap. And you need to get into something, and I think you need to start to learn those mechanics at the bottom. And then you need to kind of see like the connection, you will start inevitably to see like the connection to a different field. So, for example, with architecture or just nature, if you start like looking at trees and you start realizing that they have like a specific proportion, and then you start into drawing the human body, and you see that the human body has a specific proportion, and then you start looking at buildings, and you see like that the best buildings kind of have the similar rhythm in proportion. Then you have music. Music also is following a rhythm. And then you look at buildings and at music, and you kind of start seeing like that the rhythm which is in music described more mathematically is in buildings just more proportionally described. So there's an overlap. You could get even like into something like biology, like just into anatomy. And you could start like looking at different skeletons of different animals and see their proportions or something. Like or just if you have any mathematical function which is like describing any part of the world, and you start like to kind of approach it in any visual field, like there are so many connections, and it's like really interesting when you get into something, learn something, you cross reference if what you already know, how much new there is to discover. And it's a really great quote, which I don't know who said it, but it's like, to have a new world, you don't need to have a new world, but you need to have new eyes. So, which basically means you start looking at things differently. And I think like getting deeply in a field really opens your eyes and to look at things you looked at before in a new light and in a new perspective. And that's where it's like getting really interesting and really magical.
And on that note, I have reached the final question that I always ask, and that is, of course, why are stories important?
Because a human is a storytelling creature. I mean, you want to, I think, just on a deep psychological level, we want to connect to our heroes and to our villains, and we want to see what is happening. And I mean, whenever you have a video game, a lot of people ask, yeah, what's the story? In a video game, maybe the story is not even like the script, but it's also what you do in the game. So when different mediums have different stories, but at the end, people love to talk about their experiences, and they love to share their experiences, and that's also storytelling. And every story we are telling is like to some extent sharing like an experience. And I think just that is something deeply, deeply human. And like the world would be a really boring place if we wouldn't have great stories to tell.
Thomas Feichtmeir, thank you so much for coming on to One Story Building.
Thanks a lot for having me, Cody. I enjoyed it a lot, and I wish all of you a beautiful day.